Hi, I'm Father Joe Carr with the Great Grouping, and welcome to Exploring Catholicism. We're here today with Adam Ward and Anthony Isacco. They're psychologists, and Father Jay asked me to sit in and guest host for him. I'm not quite sure what he was thinking, but we're glad to have you here. If you could start by telling us a little bit about yourselves.
Sure. I'm Anthony Isacco. I'm a professor of psychology at Chatham University in Pittsburgh, and have a private practice where I practice psychology. And I'm a member of St. John and Paul Parish with a wife and 4 daughters.
Wow.
And
Adam.
I'm Adam Ward, also a parishioner at St. John and Paul. I'm a school psychologist, and I work at Chartiers Valley School District down in Bridgeville, PA.
Can you tell me how you got into this field, and if you think of it more as a career or a vocation?
Sure. It's a bit of a long-winded answer, but so I've always wanted to help people, especially kids. And I initially wanted to go into the medical field. Thought, I'll be a doctor, a pediatrician, maybe a physician assistant. Went to Seton Hill University for my undergrad. Went into biology for my undergrad, and then when I got to organic chemistry and cell biology, it was difficult to say the least. And after those courses ended, I kind of realized maybe I need to change majors, find something I'm a little better at. And I'd always mentioned psychology. My parents actually kind of said, "Hey, you always talk about this. Like, why don't you look into that?" So I switched to psychology for my major. It ended up going really well. I loved it. And then my senior year of college, I realized, well, what can I do with just an undergrad in psychology? And it turns out you can't do that much. So I thought, well, I need to look at grad school because I want to work in the realm of psychology. And my dad was helping me look at different programs and everything. We actually stumbled upon Cal U's school psychology program. And I was like, well, I don't know what that is, but why not? Gave it a shot, and I applied. And then once I started the program and learned, what it was, how working with kids and working in a school hands-on, that's exactly what I was looking for. And I didn't even know it existed until just kind of I stumbled upon it. Answer your question, whether or not I see it as like a job or a vocation. I do see it as a job. I think my vocation is to help kids in some capacity. And I really think that this career allows me to do so in a pretty effective way. It allows me to touch the lives of many different kids, because also by working in a school, I get to coach sports as well. So while working with kids in a more structured setting, during the school day, I also get to work with them in a more relaxed environment, through athletics. But it gives me a lot of different opportunities to try to help kids through difficult situations. So.
You were a pretty successful college athlete too, weren't you?
I don't know if I'd say successful, but I did play college football at Seton Hill, and I really enjoyed that. And that gave me a great opportunity while I was there.
Great. And how about you?
Yeah, growing up, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I went to college and just did general studies, and then landed at philosophy as a major. Imagine that. So, and it was maybe my second year, I took intro to psychology, and I was like, oh, this is like the practical application of philosophy. And I just loved the class, and I loved the professor. And so then I majored in psychology, and kind of the rest is history from there. I knew that's what I wanted to do after that class. And it became more of a vocation at that point, where I wanted to use the skills I was learning for something good to help people, as Adam said. And then over time, basically that vocation became more crystallized as I became a psychologist that worked with Catholics in particular, the diocese, working with clergy, deacons, and seminarians around their vocation and helping them discern what's best for them in the church.
That's great. Have you seen a lot of challenges lately with COVID and all of the dramatic social changes that have come about?
I'll let you go first on that one.
All right. Well, the short answer to that question is absolutely. I mean, COVID has I think, exposed the mental health wound in society for everybody to see and feel. And so there's no longer hiding the mental health concerns out there. We see everything from, increased stress levels, anxiety, depression, on the darker side of things, more suicidal thoughts and behaviors. And so really this is, whenever I talk to my colleagues in practice, they say this is their busiest time of their entire lives. The demand has been off the chart, and most of them are operating on wait lists right now.
I've noticed that when I've had people come to me, we do pastoral counseling, which is basically listening to people and kind of triaging to, do you just need someone to listen to you and you know the answer, or do we need to get you to somebody's professional? And I've been amazed that sometimes it's weeks and weeks before they can get an appointment.
Yeah.
What has your experience been?
So I see more of, the school-based thing with the kids, but I'd say with the middle schoolers, I'm seeing more of a spike in like mental health concerns, because usually by age 14 it is around 50% of when, mental health conditions begin to surface and kind of rear their heads. I'm seeing them like in that pre-development stage. And also I feel like COVID and the lockdowns and all the inconsistencies are kind of a catalyst for where if there was something there a little bit, it's kind of been magnified by all the inconsistencies, because kids really benefit from routine and knowing that, like, for a lot of them, school is a safe place because they know I go there 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, get to see my friends. I know what to expect. And when you take that consistency out, it can cause them to really, really struggle, especially when it changes, week to week. But on the flip side, the middle schoolers know what school should be like, because, had normal school from, K to 5. But with the little ones, like kindergarten, first grade, second grade, because I work with that population as well, they're struggling because they're not used to being in school and having demands placed on them, where they've been at home for the first 5-6 years of their life learning, on an iPad or on a screen. All of a sudden they're in school 5 days a week for 8 hours a day, and they have to sit in their seat and they have to follow the schedule, and they can't just get up and do what they want. So it's a big adjustment for them. And I think once things are consistent, it'll be easier for them. But just with things so up in the air, it's really tough to have like set in stone expectations for a lot of these kids, because things change week to week, it seems, and it's hard on them.
I never gave that a thought of not having that structure as an experience. If you're studying at home and you're thirsty, you go get a drink. You don't have to put your hand up and ask the teacher, and that would be really earth-shaking when you're that little, I imagine.
Yeah, and it you can almost see it on them, where some of them adjust well. Like, it's not all of them, but there's some where they're struggling, and then you kind of do some investigating, do some digging, try to figure out what's going on, and then you learn, well, when they would have had preschool, things were locked down, so they didn't have preschool. Last year they were learning virtually still, so then it's like their first time coming to school, and they might be 6 or 7 and they're in first or second grade. You may think, well, you're a first or second grader, you should know, like, we have a routine. This is when we go to lunch. You have to raise your hand, that kind of thing. But then you take a step back and realize, wait, they don't know this. They haven't been to school before. So you almost have to treat them as like a preschooler or a kindergartner in a lot of ways behaviorally, and try to kind of catch them up to speed with where you expect them to be.
I tell you what, you're talking about preschoolers. I tell you what really fascinated me. I was at St. Killian's for a while, and we would have the school mass, and there'd be 500 kids there. And about 3 or 4 months into the school year, once the teachers' aides and the teachers got used to the kids and the kids got used to them, they would bring them and they would sit them all across the front row. And it was amazing to me. They were so disciplined and they were so quiet. And every once in a while, one would start to squirm, and all the teacher would have to do is lean forward and look, and they would straighten back up again. And I was thinking, these are the same kids I see on Sunday, and their parents can't control 2 of them. There's 2 teacher and a teacher's aide controlling 30 of them.
The power of the teacher's look can't be underestimated.
Yes. They make jokes about the nuns with the rulers. There's none of that, I know. It's just that, like you say, what the expectation of them is. Wow. Do you see young people coming to you and looking for help, or is the stigma still out there that I don't want to do that? What will people think if I go and ask for help?
Well, I still think that there's mental health stigma out there. I mean, because that has been so ingrained in our culture over the years that getting past stigma is still difficult. But I would say it's lessened over the last 2 years because of the distress caused by the pandemic and other kind of factors out there. And so, whereas before I would probably have conversations with parents or teenagers about, trying to sell them on counseling. There's no selling going on now. That they're wanting to go and wanting to find a good counselor to get some help from. So in that regard, there's a little bit of a silver lining that people recognize how helpful counseling can be and are seeking it out and are motivated for it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm seeing the same thing because I guess on the flip end, like talking to families, usually it's trying to sell them, before the pandemic, like, hey, your kid could benefit from talking to somebody. And now, there's wait lists for months for kids to be seen. But within the school, kids are pretty open, I'd say, for the most part, about seeking help, or if they're feeling a certain way, they know that there's certain adults they can go to who want to help them. There's some who are reluctant, but I'd say by and large, there's kind of been a bit of a shift where they realize it's okay to ask for help and to seek someone out, and they realize it's okay to not be okay sometimes. But then again, there's also somewhere you can have to sell them on, like, hey, it's okay to talk to me. Like, I'm not going to tell you what we're talking about. I'm here to help you. But I'd say by and large, it's been kind of a shift where they're more open to like seeking help.
Yeah, I know a lot of times when I have people come to me as a priest, and I'll suggest maybe going to see a counselor, and you can tell from their just tone of voice that they're reluctant. I'll say, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It may be you're in a situation you're not used to, whether it's dealing with a teenage child of yours that they're rebellious, or you're dealing with somebody who has an addiction, or you're dealing with somebody who has an anger management issue. And you can go and talk to a counselor. Maybe they can give you a strategy of how to deal with this. When I do this, I get this reaction. How can I do it differently? Maybe it might be the way I phrase something, or maybe it might be something as simple as don't raise your voice, just talk calmly. And I found that people, adults especially, are a lot less reluctant when you explain it to them in simple terms. That maybe you're just, if you're having problems with your teeth, you go to a dentist, and and they tell you what you need to do, whether you're brushing wrong or whether you have to get a filling, and no one thinks anything of it. It's sad that there are people that may be reluctant to get the help that could really make their lives a lot less stressful. I know one time when my mom died when I was in seminary, and I had 2 panic attacks, and it was terrifying at the time. And luckily, I'd heard other people talk about it, and I knew what it was when it happened. And I just sat there for a few minutes and just breathed slowly. And this will pass. And I talked to a psychologist later about it. My spiritual director not only had a doctorate in theology, also had a doctorate in psychology. And he said, you did exactly what you're supposed to do. Sit there and just take a couple deep breaths and relax, and it'll usually go away. But it was wonderful being able to talk to somebody about it, and they could just reassure me that it's a normal thing when something traumatic happens in your life for that to happen a couple of times, not to get overly concerned about it. So that was just reassuring. We had talked about Saints John and Paul and the other parishes in our great grouping. We have lots of young people, and talked about where we could perhaps use a ministry that involves mental health and I guess emotional issues and things like that, and realizing that you are both, as you've described, pushed to the limits in terms of your schedules, and was wondering if we might be able to do maybe just some sessions of like a just a talk or two on subjects that you think would be of interest to the parishioners.
Mhm.
Do you,
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for some parish-based kind of mental health ministry. And so, Adam and I have talked a lot about that and have started some meetings at the parish already. And, Adam with his specialty in working with kids and adolescents, being able to partner with the youth group would be a great opportunity. I would love to be able to do maybe something more on the vocational side, because if you help someone find their vocational path, you're helping them find meaning and purpose in their life, and what a great gift that is as well. So I think there's lots of opportunities there.
Yeah, I agree. And then to piggyback on what you said, Anthony, I think it'd be beneficial not only to have like these sessions, but even have present information that parents could, because I'm coming from the angle of working with kids, of like what parents can look for with their kids. Like maybe like, oh, here's some signs of depression, increased appetite, decreased appetite, like little things like that, where a day to day you might think, oh, my kid's behaving the same, but sometimes it takes that outside set of eyes, like how you mentioned with the counseling, like that third party, outside perspective, like, hey, what you're going through is okay, but also to keep an eye out for things. So like those subtle changes. So I think that could be beneficial too, like an informational session of things to look out for, and then also resources, whether it's outside counseling or ways to talk to the school about concerns. I think it'd be really, really beneficial.
that sounds great. I know that we've seen lots and lots of people under stress, and so many people talking about just being just anxious and angry at little things, and they realize they're doing it, but it's hard to do it, and there's so much stress with all of the things going on. And I think that um, even some coaching on how to handle stressful situations, it'd be really helpful. The other thing that I've seen a lot of lately, and I experienced it close up myself. My dad died of dementia a few years ago, and we're seeing lots of people in the sandwich generation where they're taking care of their kids and they're also taking care of their adult parents as well. And significant a number of people who are experiencing dealing with people with dementia. And if you are familiar with it, you can tell that there are certain patterns of thought that and behaviors that are typical. And if you don't get a chance to talk to anybody else about it who's familiar with the diseases, a lot of that stuff takes you by surprise, and you think that your whole situation is completely unique. And I know with my dad, he started to get paranoid and would think that we were trying to poison him. So my sister would make a sandwich for him, and he would have to take a bite out of it, have her take a bite out of it, so he knew that he wasn't being poisoned. And have you seen a lot of people coming to get kind of advice and counseling around dealing with the adult population, their parents?
Well, yeah, you have that that sandwich generation for sure that's kind of feeling pulled in multiple directions, but because they're still caring for their own children, and now their parents are getting to a place where they need to be cared for as well too. So you definitely get stress from both sides of those relationships. But you bring up a good point, which is if you do something in the parish, then you have a community of support. And I think one of the things I talk with people about, particularly Catholics, is you can get really good mental health benefits by just being a Catholic if you practice the faith. There's really good research out there that shows that praying, going to church, being part of a faith community is all good for your mental health. So if you participate in the faith life, that will have a positive impact on your mental health.
That's a great point. So I know sometimes when people come to me and they're telling them that they're just incredibly stressed, I'll suggest that they either go to adoration and just sit there. You don't have to pray anything specific. Just sit there in the presence of God in the tabernacle, and there's a calming effect of that. Or at Christmas time, sometimes I would make somebody's penance. I would say, I want you to go and stare at the nativity set and think about what it must have been like that first Christmas when all of the angels had left and all the shepherds had left, and everyone else was gone except Joseph and Mary and a couple of donkeys and a sheep or two. And how peaceful it must have been. And just think about that for 5 or 10 minutes, and just, let it be a reset button. And when you need to do it again, just, pull out a Christmas card and look at it. But I know it has a calming effect for me. I think there's just little things that we take for granted that can help. Because what happens oftentimes in a sandwich generation where you've got the kids and you're trying to negotiate who's going to take who where to soccer practice, and then take them to get something to eat afterwards, or get up early and take them to rowing practice or hockey practice, and then get them something to eat, and then who's going to pick them up after school, and layer on top of that taking care of mom and dad, and especially in a COVID situation, it's got to be mind numbing. And what ends up happening when they get that stressful, I see them bickering with one another and snapping at each other, and they don't really want to do that, and they recognize it's not helpful, but it's a kind of a vicious cycle. Do you have any suggestions for people that are facing that kind of stress inside the family?
I'd say looking at it from the kid's perspective, because I don't have the experience Anthony has working with adults, but I guess, with kids and keeping kids in mind, they can, act out because they're younger kids. They don't know how to think, oh, I'm angry because all of these stressful things are happening. They don't know how to articulate that and have that, like, that metacognition, like think about how they're thinking. So I try to remind myself when I'm working with a student, if they're like escalate or they're, frustrating me, that they're going through all this stuff too, but then they're a little kid and they don't have the experiences I have from before all of this. So they don't know how to think, oh, things are more normal. Things have been calm. All they know is like this craziness and inconsistencies, and kind of like reframing how they're experiencing something, and like reminding myself that this is their first experience. Or even, if you think of like a toddler when they drop their ice cream cone and they're crying hysterically, it's like, it's just ice cream. What's the big deal? But to them, that's the most traumatic thing they've experienced in their whole life, so far. So like with kids, if they go through, a breakup and, they're in 7th grade and they lost their boyfriend of 2 weeks and they're devastated, like, yeah, they may not seem like a big deal to us because, we've had different relationships and go through different experiences, but to them, that's the biggest thing they've been through so far in their life. So I think trying to reframe and try to approach things as like trying to look at it from like a kid's perspective, really, of like, oh, I can see why this is a big deal to you because you haven't had anything else like this happen to you before. And really just like that reframing that mindset, and also just trying to listen more. Because I feel like sometimes, especially with kids, they say something and you think, oh, I know it's best, but even hearing them out, because they notice when they're not being listened to. Like they may not fully understand, but they can tell if like someone's brushing them off or kind of dismissing them. So I guess like encouraging parents just to listen to what they're saying, and also kind of reframe your mindset and your angles, knowing like, oh, this might be the biggest thing that I've ever gone through, so far.
That's great, because I've noticed that with people that are dealing with dementia, that you kind of have to put yourself in their shoes, because if they're used to being the head of the household and they're used to driving anywhere, and they're the ones that everybody turns to if there's a problem, and all of a sudden something as simple as taking their keys away from them because they're getting forgetful when they drive could be major trauma for them. We think, well, wow, it's an inconvenience, but it's much more than just an inconvenience to them. It's taking away their autonomy and a sense of respect. And I think it's real helpful to put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my favorite things to talk to my students at Channel about is self-care, and I have this picture that I show them every semester in every class of airline passengers. And one airline passenger has their oxygen mask on, and then they're helping the person next to them. And it fits with the directions we receive on the airplane. If there's turbulence, put your mask on first and then help the person next to you. And so for adults in that sandwich generation that are feeling stressed out, one of the things I tell them is that you can only give what you have. And in order to have your tank full, you need to do something that fills your tank, that gives you oxygen, that gives you that breath to breathe, And so if you're feeling stressed and being pulled in multiple directions, you're probably not giving a lot of good quality time and effort if you're not having that kind of gas in your tank or that oxygen in your breath. And so it's a hard conversation to have with them because they feel like they have to be stretched in those multiple directions, but to kind of push them and challenge them to think of ways to engage in self-care that's life-giving to them, that will give them energy. Usually they can find something. If you press them a little bit and hold them accountable and give them different ideas around what that means and how they can enact it, they can find something that they can put in place in their life that helps them in the situation.
And when you might have somebody else in the family, a spouse that has to take over for an hour while you go out and do something that's calming to you, or go have a cup of coffee with a friend, or go to a movie or something. I often tell couples, when they're drifting apart, you have to go out on a date now and then. Mm-hmm. Otherwise your conversations become, again, who's going to take Johnny to soccer practice and who's going to pick up Susie from gymnastics, and you lose that intimacy that you had when you would share your hopes and your dreams, and not just your carpool schedule. But so there's a lot of truth to that. And sometimes it can be an investment if you're afraid to ask somebody for a favor of, can you take over whatever it is that I have to do for an hour? Well, because I just want to go out and go for a walk, or I want to go for a run, or to the gym, or whatever. And often we're reluctant to ask for that kind of help because we feel that we're imposing on them. But if you come back and you're refreshed and you're joyful, and you're not going to yell at me when I spill my coffee on your fresh coffee, your tablecloth, then it was worth the hour. Mm-hmm. Whatever I had to do, I can put up with it. But I think we sometimes get into that, the story of Martha and Mary, where Martha's busy rushing around trying to get food together for Christ and the apostles, and Mary's just sitting there at his feet listening to what he has to say. And Martha says, Jesus, you see what all the work I have to do. Will you tell Mary to get up and help me? And he said, she's chosen the better of two things. There's time to prepare the food afterwards. We can wait, but right now her job is to just listen and to be in peace. And I think almost, as I heard you talking about making time for yourself and self-care, I was starting to think, was this an intervention on Father Jay's part? Because he's always yelling at me for not taking my vacation.
Do we need to talk off camera here, Father, a little bit more?
I hope not. So have you seen a lot of problems with social media, and not just in light of the pandemic, but probably it exacerbates whatever problems you run into? Because I know that I occasionally get kids that have really low self-esteem, and some of it comes from stuff they're experiencing on the internet.
I'd love to hear what you have to say about kids and social media and your experience.
Sure. I hate social media. I think it's the worst thing that kids can have, honestly, because it kind of creates like a keeping up with the Joneses scenario, but like it's on steroids. Because instead of going outside and see, oh, my neighbor has this red car, and oh, they just got their lawn manicured or whatever. Now you can see constantly from anyone around the world that, oh, they got this car, their parents bought them this, they have this, they're on this cool vacation, they have this outfit, they have this new phone, they have this, new electronic, whatever it is. And it's just a constant feed of that. And they can just get bombarded with comparing their life to whatever they're seeing, and the kids don't know that stuff's not real. Like it's all fake and staged. It's not true. And even if it is, I went to the beach and took a picture and posted it. I could have been in a fight with my family the other 4 days that I'm there. You know what I mean? But that one picture makes it look like, oh, it was all, rainbows and sunshine the entire time. But I feel like kids don't always think that way. They just see that picture and think, oh, look how great that person has it. I feel like you can make some of that, like, make them jealous really, and wishing that they had, more, their life was different, and they can make them seem more, unappreciative with what they have. And then on another side, the bullying that can occur, like with Snapchat, for example, because those things vanish and everything. And I see it in my own school, at the middle school especially, where kids are saying, oh, well, they said this and they told me this and they said they're going to do this. And then we say, well, can you show us? Because like this happened at school. And they said, oh, well, like it vanished. And it's like, well, evidence helps when when pursuing that. So I think it creates a lot of issues. I get that it can be nice, like for families to keep in touch and everything if they're long distance, but I think for kids, I think it's like one of the worst things they could have, because it does more harm than good, I think. So
Well, even adults, I know that it's you can put something up and have all of these people say they like it, and you get 35 people say they really love what you just wrote. And then all it takes is one or two people to say that was stupid. And those are the things that we tend to cling to, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I've seen kids with that very thing. They may post a video of them singing a song that they're really excited because they're practicing, and then their classmates tear them apart and they're really upset. And it's like, well, that's just a few people saying that. And oftentimes I feel like you have like a keyboard warrior, for lack of a better word, where they feel that they have because they're behind a screen, they're able to kind of say whatever they want, where they wouldn't say that face to face. Like I wouldn't say something nasty to Anthony, like, oh, I'm behind the screen, so I can, I can say these things. So I feel like I'm more separated and removed, and they don't feel like they're really, that human component's removed. So you see that happen a lot too. And you're right, you can even just one negative comment, they're going to fixate on that one, because one negative experience can knock out, 3 positive ones, unfortunately.
Yeah, it can be scary stuff for sure. And it's not just regulated to a problem for kids. I do see social media as a problem for adults too. And a lot of what I see is like using social media for avoidance, so they have something that's important in their life that they need to deal with, and they avoid dealing with it by, spending mindless amount of time in front of social media, scrolling through, because there is a little bit of an artificial, like self-soothing nature to it. I can just be by myself, scroll through what I like to look at and what I like to read, and kind of cocoon myself in. And so a lot of my work with them is saying, all right, we need to get out of that cocoon and we need to get you approaching the things that you need to approach in your life, because those are the things that are important. That's going to lead to maturation, and that's going to lead to meaning. And those are all things that you need. You don't need to be in a self-soothing cocoon right now.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard of Simon Sinek. He did a whole talk on that, about how addictive that behavior can be, because you can poke around and find something that's going to either soothe you or make you feel good about yourself. And all it takes is for me to send out a little hello to 30 people and just wait for people to come back. It's like a sense of immediate gratification.
And the way the algorithms work these days is, the feed just keeps feeding you things that you want, that like fit what you like, and then eliminates things that you dislike, and so it's a self-fulfilling kind of loop, and it's good to kind of get out of that, and be exposed to different opinions, different ideas, and not just be in that self-fulfilling loop.
One of the things that I've seen that is just another pandemic is pornography on the internet. When I was growing up, there wasn't that kind of anonymity. There were magazines that had those kind of pictures and things like that, but they were in the supermarket or in the drugstore, and if anyone bought one, everyone could tell what you were doing. But now it can be so anonymous, and it's so damaging to relationships. You're creating kind of expectations that are just completely unrealistic in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I can talk to that, or you want to jump in? I think you're up.
Okay, so my turn to go first.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, even when I see kids, they might accidentally stumble upon something, but I'll share where I'm going with this. So parents often give their kids a tablet. Not all, but I don't know if you give your kids tablets or not, but I feel like sometimes they might have a tablet that has internet access, and you can put different not that kind of tablet, but like an iPad or like one of there's electronic
I'm old
tablets.
school.
I wish they'd pencil and paper. But like when they have that internet access, you can put parental safeguards and everything on there, but there's still ways to stumble across stuff. Even if there's different firewalls in place and age restrictions, like certain apps aren't, like YouTube, for example, aren't necessarily filtered out with that content. And I've seen kids stumble across stuff when they're kindergarten, first grade, second grade, so like 5 to 7, and they're seeing these things and they don't know how to handle that because a child shouldn't be seeing that kind of stuff, and they're not purposely seeking it. Then they find it opens that can of worms, and it's really hard to get all that back in there once they kind of stumble across that. And they show a kid on the bus, and that just this huge domino effect. So when kids have those tablets, I mean, I know it's an easy babysitter because you can put that in front of them and they can look at it, but they can stumble on stuff, and once they see that can have huge changes and impacts on them, especially if you don't know they're seeing it until you find out after they've been kind of consuming that content for a while. It's difficult to try to undo that damage, especially when they're so young.
Yeah. I mean, I think the good news is that 10 years ago, this conversation would be a lot different, because I think 10 years ago, the church hadn't really kind of wised up to how prevalent this issue is. Psychology was kind of like in a weird space where they're like, well, is it really problematic? Is it really an addiction kind of thing? And so there was a lot of ambivalence about this topic and a lot of things unknown about it. Fast forward now, 10 years later to 2022, cat's out of the bag. We know pornography is problematic. We know it can be addictive. We know it can wreak havoc in people's relationships, their psyche, their mental health, their faith, all these kinds of things. And so we have a lot more tools and resources available to us to address pornography problems now. Counselors are getting better trained to deal with it. They recognize it as a problem. There's online tools and resources to deal with it. Research studies are coming out to say, here's the science behind it. Here's the neuroscience and how it impacts the brain and the brain waves. And so you almost have to like retrain your brain and get those circuitry back in line in order to kind of get your mental health back in line as well after being exposed to it, because it's a trauma to the brain, to be exposed to that, and especially if you're exposed to it chronically and it becomes an addiction. So we've come a long way in 10 years, but we still have a ways to go, because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry that actually brings in more money per year than the 4 major sports leagues combined.
Wow.
Yeah, it's mind blowing.
I can't begin to wrap my mind around that, but I just know how awful it is in terms of relationships, because I see sometimes maybe a couple that's not that old, and maybe they come home and want to be intimate, and one or the other one is just tired, and if they turn to pornography instead, then the next time the person approaches them and say, okay, I'm not tired now, then it's like, well no, that's okay. You don't have to bother. And it becomes an alternative. And then the person is crushed because, well, don't you like me anymore? Or don't you love me anymore? Am I not attractive to you? And I remember talking to somebody who we just had a a conversation in a Chinese food restaurant. We were waiting for, I don't know how we got into this conversation. We got to be very good friends, but they were telling me that they were at a church in California, and the minister was there. They weren't Catholic at the time. The minister who was there had a bedroom, and outside the bedroom was a little office, and he would often work on his homilies in the office, and his wife would go to bed, and he would just go in when he was done working on. Well, one night he was working on his homily, but then he got attracted by a picture, and one picture led to another picture and another picture, and it was pornography. And he didn't realize his wife was still awake, and she could see what he was looking at on the screen. And she started to cry, and he said, "Honey, what's wrong?" And she said, "Am I not enough for you anymore?" And he was so crushed at the thought that he would hurt her like that. And he reassured her, and he not only did a turnaround, and not that it was easy, but he did a turnaround and just told himself, "I have a zero tolerance for that, because it's not an action or a sin that doesn't have any consequences to other people. It, whether you see it or not, it's impacting your relationship with the other person." And he actually did a wonderful homily on it. And all of the people in the congregation, instead of looking down on him for, "Oh, you've got this attraction," they really respected him, because he came out and said, "Look, I had a problem, and I didn't realize that it wasn't just impacting me; it was impacting my family." And I had a lot of respect for him for having coming out and doing that, because it's not always easy to admit that you've got a problem.
Yeah. There's actually ministries, support groups, and counselors who specialize in helping like spouses and partners of people who have a pornography issue and an addiction, because it's not an isolated problem. It becomes a relationship problem as well too. And so that's kind of a special form of kind of intervention for the spouse or partner as well in the relationship.
It's interesting when you're talking about relationships. We do at the parish. I think all four of us do a questionnaire when couples are thinking of getting married. It's called Focus. Focus on communication. But they ask all kinds of questions, and one of them is relating to pornography, and there's other questions like one of the interesting ones is if you are blessed to have children, will the relationship with the children become more significant than your relationship with your spouse? And that's a really hard one to answer, especially if maybe a couple is widowed or divorced and an annulment, and they get back together and there are children involved. Well, you're coming new into this house, and I've known you for 2 years, but I've known my daughter for 6 years, and it's interesting because the proper answer from the test is no. My relationship with my spouse is the primary relationship, because the kids get stability from that. That they know that even though maybe mom and dad will argue about something, that they're not going to break up, because they're committed to being together, and I'll never have to worry about that. And I'm sure you probably see a lot more divorces and family trauma now than when I was a kid.
Yeah. So as a school psychologist, one of the things I do is I evaluate for special education. And when I do this, so I'm determining if a child has, a school disability based off state and federal law. And so there's a battery of assessments I use and data I have to collect. And one of those things is parent input. So I send out this packet asking for, who all lives in the household, age of those people, relation to the child and everything. And it's not surprising anymore, which I guess is kind of sad. I almost anticipate like there's some kind of, brokenness, for lack of a better word, in the family, like maybe a divorce situation, a single parents don't live together. Like more often than not, there's some kind of dynamic there in the home that isn't like your typical nuclear family of like mom, dad, kid, siblings, that kind of thing. And there are other supports in place, like maybe mom, aunt, uncle, grandma, and those are great, but those aren't always, the perfect, comparison, like having like mom and dad in the home. And obviously there's situations there that, you can't control somewhere to pass away or something, but you do often see a lot of, divorce, or maybe parents weren't married to begin with. And so the family kind of falls apart quickly. And then you see these kids coming through and there's so many inconsistencies at home, and school's one, constant factor. And then they're struggling to read, for example, but then you see, oh, well, at home, you're bouncing around between 2-3 different houses and your schedule's all inconsistent. So when you come to school, yeah, it's a safe and consistent place for you, but mentally, like, you have to think about the hierarchy of needs, where it's like, food and sleep and like social belonging at the top. It's where more of like the schooling and like academic and higher level things are. But if their basic needs aren't being met, like maybe they're eating and sleeping, but emotionally those needs aren't necessarily being met, to me, it's like, oh, well, it makes sense they're struggling in school because their home component might be, a struggle.
Wow. And taking that, and not to obsess over the pandemic, but if you take that chaos that may be at home, and they are relying on school as one thing that's consistent. I know when I have to get there. I know when I'm going to have lunch. I know when I'm done. I know when soccer practice starts or football practice starts. And then you take that away for a couple of months, then it comes back and you think it's okay. And 3 weeks later, they lock down the school and you're back to where. That's going to be mind bending.
It's tough. My district, fortunately, we've been very, consistent with our schedule this year. We haven't had to, shut down any buildings. I know last year we had different options, like being hybrid, where you'd be, in school 2 days a week, 3 days virtual, or maybe 4 days a week, 1 day virtual, or totally virtual. And that inconsistency, and the year before we went into the lockdown, and then hearing like, oh, well, maybe next week we'll come back to school. And it's like, oh no, maybe the following week. And then all of that, confusion and everything. That was tough, but I can see with the kids, like, it's how beneficial it is. And I might have like lost sight of that at first, of how important it is for them to know, I come to school Monday through Friday from, 8 to 3 every day, unless like it snows or something. And it kind of reminded me like, wow, like this is important for them. Like this is a huge factor for a lot of these kids, and kind of one of those like resiliency factors, or if they know they have that consistently, reliable place they can go to, that can help them overcome, things at home, or like, all the way COVID can impact other people, all those factors that can help them kind of persevere through those other events.
I can't imagine what it's like doing what you do if it's not kind of God's calling to you, because I know that even in the priesthood, I've seen people that kind of picked it because either their parents wanted them to do it or they thought it would be a cool thing to do, and they're there for a couple of years and they leave because they can't deal with it. So it must. People ask me all the time. I came from a parish where we had 2 parishes. We were doing at one point 145 funerals a year, and I was there for about 7 years. So that's probably pretty close to 1,000 funerals that we did between the two of us. And they would say, "Doesn't that depress you?" And I'd say, "No, because you're getting to interact with people at one of the most traumatic moments in their life, and to be able to maybe give them some perspective, and to tell them that this isn't the end of the story, that you'll see them again, and to remind them of some of the funny things and the touching things and the things that they're not thinking about right now. All they're thinking about right now is the sadness. But if you can take them back and to say, what was it like at Christmas time when you were little?" And their eyes light up and they start to talk, and it's touching and really rewarding. But if all you focus on is, "Oh my gosh, I got another funeral," it could make you crazy. So I know that you're seeing people oftentimes when they're really struggling. Do you find that it takes the energy away from you, or does it invigorate you when you can help someone?
Well, the work we do, I mean, it's work for sure, so it does take energy, and it can be tiring at times, but there's so much good that comes from it. And it's very easy to kind of see God's presence in not only the work that we do, but also in the lives of the people that we work with, despite the pain and the suffering that we've kind of talked about today, and that we see out there, people get better. They develop coping resources. They're able to conjure up courage and resilience and some grit. You see positive changes that they're able to make. And to be able to play a role in that is very fulfilling. And knowing that we can't do it alone, that's where we get some grace to help us as well, is very helpful. I can say that. But it's amazing to see how someone can start at point A, and they're in the darkest, lowest point of their life, and then through the work they get to point B, and they're on kind of top of the mountain with their arms raised. It's quite the transformation that we get to witness.
Yeah, that must be really rewarding.
Yeah, and to piggyback off what you said, just keeping your faith as a reminder like that, like focal point of through our work, it makes a world of difference. Because whenever I'm going to work with a student, or if there's kids in crisis, because I've dealt with kids who are in grief and feeling suicidal, and all kinds of the darkest moments of their life at that point. And even when I'm running over to a kid, I say prayer real quick, hey, God, I need help with this, because clearly I can't do this by myself. So please help me. And just like in knowing, going in and helping those kids, like in those darkest moments, and knowing that like can help them try to get to that point, and knowing I can't do it by myself, and relying on colleagues and prayer, and relying on God as well. It, like Anthony said, it's incredibly fulfilling, and it is draining, but I mean the positives far outweigh any negative side effects of it.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's a sign that it is a vocation. It's a calling to do what you do, because not everybody could do it. The same thing's true of a couple of other professions, like the priesthood. If you're not called to it, it's a real struggle. The same thing with funeral directors. They work the most awful hours, and if they're called to it and they really enjoy the work, they see that they're helping other people, and there's something fulfilling. You mentioned before, if you find the right path for someone and they find work or even a hobby that's really tangibly fulfilling, it can really change your perspective and make you feel fulfilled.
Yeah, I don't think our job is a kind of a clock in, clock out kind of job, punching a time clock and just hoping, wait for the paycheck to come every 2 weeks. There's much more, I think, invested in it personally, and I think being more directed by our faith, and that this is like what we're supposed to be doing, and therefore that drives us even more.
Yeah, that's great. I know that you probably have seen addictions and what it's done in families. We have a program that was started here in the parish called 6 Steps to Sanity, where it's a support group, and it's run by one of our parishioners named Chico and her husband Joe, and they had experienced addiction in their family, and sought help, and they found that there was a need for help for the parents themselves. Either the ministry is ministering either to the spouse or the parent of an adult addict, whether it's drugs or alcohol or pornography, or failure to leave home after you're 50 years old, you're still living in mom's basement. And the first thing they tell you when they meet is, if you're here to think we are going to help you fix your child, we're not. You're in the wrong room. What we're here to do is to help you realize you're not alone, and maybe to give you some strategies of how to interact with your addict. And they don't call them addicts, they call them prodigals. And talking about the prodigal son and how it creates chaos in the house. And one of the first things they want to do is recognize that there's an issue. And if you have someone in the household who is addicted, chances are there's chaos in your house, whether it's not knowing if they're going to show up sober to grandma's 90th birthday party, or whether you don't know you're going to get a call in the middle of the night that they wrecked the car once again, or to wake up in the middle of the night and not know where they are and not know if they're coming back, and all of those kind of things. And just sitting around in a group of people and sharing stories confidentially about what you experience, you see all these people with their heads nodding. You know, yeah, I experienced that too. I thought I was unique. I thought I was alone. And just being around people where you know that they're experiencing the same thing, maybe even right now, is comforting. And the other side of the coin is, if you have somebody who's been there and gotten through it, and their prodigal is doing better, that it gives you hope that this isn't a lost cause. And the really sad thing that I saw out of it is how oftentimes in the rehab programs, they don't recognize that often they're dealing with dual diagnosis, where it's not just a matter of I've got a drinking problem. That's a symptom of the fact that I'm suffering from depression, and I want to forget about all my problems, so I drink. And then the drinking makes the depression worse when they come down from it. And it's been nice to see that one ministry in our church just not only flourish, but they've spawned other ministries in other parishes. And I'm really hoping that we can figure out a way that we can utilize your skills and the skills of other professionals in the parish, and come up with a ministry that will help people through all of this. And I know we can't put it all on your back. You know, we could employ both of you full time and still not meet all the demand. But I'm hoping that people will maybe email us at the parish, or call us and say, hey, here's an idea of where I think maybe if you could do a little Wednesday evening roundtable discussion or a presentation or something. We'd love to see you talk about this, or love to see you talk about that. And I think it would really, the sky's the limit as to what could be done. As long as we recognize that we don't burn the two of you out.
Well, yeah, we would love to do more at the parish, and hopefully, parishioners hear more about, the mental health ministry. They watch this and get inspired, perhaps, would be good. And we, develop like a good coalition of parishioners that we could, tackle this as a team, and draw upon the strengths of other parishioners. There's likely other mental health professionals in the parish, but the mental health ministry doesn't need to be composed simply of mental health professionals. Parents, teenagers, young adults, who we all have mental health, and so we can all contribute to enhancing that in the parish.
Yeah. And to piggyback off what you said, those people who want to get involved, but also those who have things that they think should be addressed or wish would be addressed. I mean, that's super helpful, because we've put some feelers out to try to get an idea of, some of the areas of like interest or concern are of parishioners. But if there's something on someone's mind and they reach out to us and say, hey, I want to learn more about, depression, or helping, being a caretaker for an aging parent, like reaching out and letting us know what they want is super helpful, because that way we know we have a starting point and something to focus on.
Yeah. And that's great. I really thank you for taking time away from your busy days to be here. And I hope I haven't embarrassed Father Jay too much.
I think you did, Father Jay, well today. Good job, Father.
I agree.
Yeah.
But thank you for coming and for all that you do for the parish. And it's just comforting to know that that there's help out there and it's available. And if people can let us know where they think there's a need, and or be able to volunteer. I know that Catholic Charities developed a whole free healthcare center, and when they developed it, using largely doctors that either had a little free time or that were retired, they realized that there was a great need for dentistry. That was one of those things that wasn't being addressed, and that has just really blossomed. And I can very easily see, I know that whenever someone passes out in church, you see doctors and nurses and paramedics running up, and you never realize that that's what they did. And I'm hoping that we'll get some people like you to let us know that you're out there and that you're willing to lend a hand. But if we can end in prayer, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Please, Lord, bless Father Jay on his retreat, and we ask you to bless this ministry and bless them in all of the work that they do, and inspire them. And if there's one person out there watching right now that feels like they're at the end of the rope, we ask you, Lord, to send a special angel to reassure them that they're not alone, and that they would reach out and get the help that they need. We ask this all through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you again.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.